collect, gather, and go out, understand, talk to people, and then come back and very quickly start to execute on what do these people really need.
Well, welcome back to the Culture Works podcast. I'm Adrian Gostick here with my good friend, Chester Elton. And this is the show where we explore what it really takes to build workplace cultures that perform.
Yeah, and today we're talking with someone who's leading one of the most challenging transformation projects that we've heard about in a long time. This is going to be a great conversation. Cory Rose is with us today. She's the Chief Human Resources Officer at Eyecare Services Partners. Now, it's a private equity-backed organization with 1,500 employees across multiple states. And here's the kicker. She's doing it with an HR team of about 7 people, which is not robust. and so we're delighted to have you here.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here to share my story, hopefully give some pointers, maybe talk about some pain. We'll see.
Well, you walked in March of 2025. The situation was what many would call a perfect storm. So you have brand new leadership team, practices all over the place, would call disparate, with no integration. There's no engagement survey in years that we know of, and a mandate to fix retention while reducing costs. All easy, right? So just kind of walk us through what you found when you got there. You've only been there a few weeks, what you found and how you're moving forward.
Yep. So I joined about 9 months ago, and I think I have to talk about my interview experience to kind of set the scene. So the first interview I had with the CEO was the exact same day I saw on LinkedIn that CEO was leaving and they brought in a brand new CEO. And so I get on the phone and I'm like, are you still hiring for this role? Like, I'm really confused. What am I walking into? But actually, George Neal, our previous CEO, was becoming chairman of the board. He was stepping down after 5 or 6 years, just ready to do his next thing. And in comes Tom Dudley, who's our new CEO, who's my current CEO, who is a wonderful human being. And so it was interesting because I was interviewing through also a changing of the guard situation. And through my conversation with both George and then Tom, I was asking a lot of questions about the HR team. And they're like, I think it's 9 or 10 people, or I think it's about 7 or 8 people. And so the numbers kept changing. And then, walk in first day and it's like, okay, here's your team. And so there hadn't been an HR leader for about 18 months. And so my regional HR team was reporting into their SVPs and VPs of operations in the field. And then I had a small corporate team, both my corporate HR director and my learning and development director, that were reporting into kind of our optical strategy folks. It was kind of, we got to park these people somewhere. Where do we park them? And then we do have 2 corporate recruiters. And so that at the time and still today makes up my team. And so walked in, I was new, Tom was new, our COO, Jana Mulaney, had just been promoted to COO, and absolutely fabulous person. And so we're all brand new, and our CFO was brand new. So we're all coming in trying to learn each other. Well, I'm also trying to learn my team and trying to figure out, like, okay, I've been in dental for so long and I know about teeth. Now, how do I move to eyes? And so, who knows where I'll go next? Maybe it'll be, ear, nose, and throat. Working on the full face.
Natural progression, right?
Natural progression. Super easy.
So really curious, you'd had big HR teams before, and much bigger employee bases and so on. The other expression, you kind of got to MacGyver it, right? You've got what you've got. What was it when you looked in and said, okay, so here's what I've got. Here's what I'm going to work with. Where do we go from here? What were the key areas that you saw in 20 years with private equity based companies and stuff? You're not like this wide-eyed, newbie to this thing. What were the areas of the company when you said, okay, we got to plug this hole, we need this expertise, we need to allocate this? How did you do that diagnostic, and what were the areas that were so important?
I think the first and most important thing in MSO type of organizations like this one, and it was similar when I was at TAG, was it doesn't really matter what's going on at corporate, right? What is the lived experience of the people in our practices in the field? Because our people are our product. And you'll hear me say that probably multiple times. When you're in healthcare, if you don't have people, you don't have people to see patients. And if you don't have patients and you can't bring better care to these patients, you don't have revenue. And so that's where things, when you're in like a typical tech organization where, well, it's our engineers who are building the platform, or it's our product people who are developing this. When your people are your product, the way that you manage and retain and talk about your product is 100% differently. And so for me, it was coming in first and understanding like what's actually going on. Like I said, there hadn't been an HR leader. there hadn't been an engagement survey. Now, I believe they did one in 2021, but they never did anything with the results. And they hired one of the big groups to do the output. So they got back all this data that was just like, your score is 3.4 and blah, 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 blah. But there weren't any insights. They weren't asking the right questions. And so for me, it was, number one, I have to quickly get my feet under what's our revenue look like? How do we make money? Start to understand my team, but then also spend time in the field. And so I would say for the first 1 or 2 months of being here, I was on a plane flying to our practices. Like, I cannot understand or build anything until I'm in the practice, truly understanding the lived environments of what does even our patient base look like? What are the different areas that we serve? And a lot of times in like the ophthalmology and optometry space, you're dealing with older populations that are doing cataracts, that have retina drugs, people that can't see. And like, vision is a really important thing. And so for me, it was collect, gather, and go out, understand, talk to people, and then come back and very quickly start to execute on what do these people really need? How do we really make them sticky and tacky from that retention perspective?
It's not lost on me, by the way, that you're talking to 2 guys wearing glasses.
Yeah, well, I know some folks. If you guys are looking for, if you're looking for a new doctor, I know a few people.
Hey, and this is so great. I mean, you're preaching to the choir here. I love that, there's an HR professional who's going out into the field, understanding patients, understanding what your staff members need. Love that idea. One of the things you did that you told us about, you put together a PEO, professional employee organization. So that's sort of a bold move when you're only 9 months in. Walk us through that decision and especially how you sold that internally.
So one of the things, in addition to coming in and learning all the other stuff, was learning our systems. And so, I get wrapped in and under, and I'm coming out of bigger, larger organizations. I've been through 3 Workday implementations, and Workday is that gold standard HRIS system. But a lot of times people bring that system in, they don't need it, they don't use it correctly. And in these healthcare MSO organizations, you're not doing a ton of talent management from like a performance management perspective. So you don't need all the bells and whistles, but you need something that works. And what I found is our ATS didn't talk to our HRIS, which for all intent and purposes, we use for time clock, we use for expenses, we use for HR data. The reports were terrible. It doesn't do any sort of like analytical capabilities. It's very much, I always joke, I think it was built on MS-DOS. And I was just like, I can't function in this environment. Like, this is so low tech. Again, was fitting our needs. But at the same time, if I'm coming in and I'm trying to make decisions with data and I'm trying to really understand and take this administrative burden off of my HR team who is doing what I consider to be like very administrative things, and I want them to level up, I've got to get a system that's going to work. And so we've just completed our PEO transition. We just finished our first payroll. There were hiccups. There's going to be hiccups with any sort of systems translation, but where we're going, I do believe is going to be a much better environment where we have this entire support team behind us. They've got payroll people, they've got HR people, so that we can actually focus on the stuff that I'm here to do and the things that truly matter.
So you got rid of all the typewriters.
Yeah, I did. And trust me, they were like, and people, I'm a part of this group called People Tech Partners, and I'd sent a feeler out of like, hey, do you have any PEOs that you work with? What do you think of? I got so many messages being like, what are you doing at 1,500 people going back to a PEO? Typically, you're moving forward and moving away from that sort of thing. But for us and where we're at and the velocity at which we are moving, I need it to be managed by somebody that's not us, especially when you're a team of, for all intent and purposes, from a true HR perspective, it's 4. It's 3 regional HR people, my corporate HR director, and myself. And then I've got a director of L&D, and then I've got recruiters. But again, like when you're thinking about core HR, like 4 people for 1,500 is an insane ratio.
Yeah. The thing I love about what you just said, though, is this idea of practicality. Yeah. What is it that we really need? We don't need a Lamborghini right now. We need a Toyota Corolla.
No.
And it's going to be, and that's going to work fine. The question I've got for you, though, is how do you then go from, I've got the foundation, I've got the basic, nuts and bolts. Now you're building culture. Because, ophthalmology, easier for me to say, ophthalmology is all these little independent kind of places. And now you're trying to bring them together. And, when you start to build a culture, how do you get them to give up that independence and start kind of moving towards all for one and one for all?
Well, that was one of the things that I would say walking in, that still hadn't happened. I believe when the original PE owner brought these all together, the idea was like, let's make a hub and spoke model. We're going to build this hub and we're going to have this great support organization and we're going to roll it out. But we never really built the spokes. And I think we never really built the spokes from the point of view of those at the top, like myself, never spent time to understand the lived experience. And I've seen this happen before when you're building something and you're not really understanding what's going on in the practice of seeing patients and doing the refracting and things like that. You can't understand because you're just making things in the back in corporate. I'm like, oh, well, we're going to do this and we're going to do this thing. And it's great. And they're like, I would just rather have you contribute $100 more to my healthcare, right? You have to truly understand the mindset of the population that you're dealing with. And so our goal and where I think we're getting to now is having reliable systems and reliable processes so that we can start building those spokes. I also found that my HR team, since they had no cohesive leader, they weren't getting together. They weren't really sharing the best processes or the lived experiences. And so bringing my entire team together and having us spend that time together as a team was hypercritical because that's where the spokes happen. When you're cross-pollinating and you're using these best practices and you're helping to help solve problems that are happening in practices, like it will exist. Now, I will say microcultures are going to continue to exist in these practices because a lot of the physicians that own these practices are still there. And that's great. Those microcultures need to exist, but those microcultures can exist in a way that they have the same foundational guidelines and the same foundational support across the board. And that's really what we've been spending kind of the last, 9 months doing.
So one of the things you said that I really appreciated was you said, collect, gather, and go. And you went and you visited the locations, right? Mm-hmm. And you said, Redding, California, in the middle of nowhere, right? Yep. Why was it so important for you as the CHRO to be on site and to see it firsthand and gather that information? And then my follow-up question is, once you had all that, what did you do with it?
So our practice out there is called Shasta. And so it is one of our most tightly knit because it is in the middle of nowhere. You either have to fly into Sacramento or Tahoe, and then it's still a 2.5, 3 hour drive from there. And so you've got this group that's up on an island and they're not getting the same level of care and feeding, I would say, as some of our practices might be in other locations where it's easier to get to, go see them. And so number one, I think it was just important from the idea of building trust to go and be there and let them know that it doesn't matter. You could be in Timbuktu, I'm coming. I'm coming because it's important for me to meet the people. It's important to not just be some title or person behind the scenes that you get emails from, but you never know who I am. You don't see my face. Because at the end of the day, I really, truly care about our people. Understanding what they do and what their lived experience is like in Redding, California is just important as, our doctors that might be in our practice in West Palm Beach. So for me, it was going out there and really getting to meet them. And it was nice. It was funny. I walked in and I was at one of our ASCs, which is an ambulatory surgery clinic. And all the nurses were seated around and they brought me in and put me in a chair. And it was kind of a firing squad, but I was like, great. What do you guys want to know? Let's have an open and honest conversation because they've never had that opportunity. Right. Mm-hmm. My regional HR partner had gone out there and, and the opposite team had gone out there, but nobody had really just sat down and been like, what do I need to know? And I think it's as simple as asking questions, the simple questions, right? You don't have to overly complicate it. And one of the things that was hyper important for me that came out of that conversation is they had questions for us about our healthcare. And they're like, look, there's no urgent care that I can go to that takes our insurance within an hour and a half. That kind of defeats the purpose of having an urgent care and having insurance. If they can't even go and get the care that they need, and as a healthcare organization, we need to do better. And so I literally came back and I had emailed our broker at the time and said, I need to understand where is our health insurance accepted within this circle of time? And also, why has this never been brought up before when we've been with the same broker and the same insurance carrier for the last 6 years? And so we did change insurance carriers moving. It wasn't because of this, but without asking these questions or having somebody have that opportunity to just tell me hey, this is a barrier to care for me, that's an issue.
Yeah, this reminds us, Chester and I have a good friend, Hubert Joly, who saved Best Buy. He came in as the CEO, spent his first couple of weeks actually in the stores, and people would tell him, hey, the website says we have this. People come in, they're all mad. And he started realizing, let's just start addressing the concerns of the people in the region. Now, one of the problems that he says, and I think you've found as well, is that you get to Redding, California, you get to Palm Beach, and they go, Yeah, I've heard this before. You're selling me a bill of goods. Come on, Cory, give me, how are you going to prove that you're actually, legit here?
And that was one of the purposes that I did an engagement survey, but I didn't hire some group to do this. I didn't use Culture Amp. I didn't use, these big ones. I built a very easy survey on SurveyMonkey that was 5 questions. That was like, what's working? What do we need to be doing? Would you rate us? Obviously, I had to have like the ENPS question of like, would you rate this as a place to work? But for me, it wasn't just asking the questions at one point in time. It was doing something with this. And so I was hyper over communicative that like, I need you to take the quiz. I need you to take the employee survey. I need you to trust that it is confidential. And I also want you to believe me when I say we're going to do something with this. This is how many people responded. This is exactly what the top themes are that you're telling us. And some of this stuff was like IT related because we had outsourced IT. And this is how we're fixing it. And we are still holding ourselves accountable to that day. One small thing that came out of that, we never really had town halls or allowed FAQs. And so we set up a corporate town hall. We've had 2 of those since the survey's closed, because showing up and doing what you say you're going to do, like the follow through is the most important thing. Number one, right? I think of 2 hypercritical things in business. Number one, change is always hard. If you're going to change something though, communicate frequently, communicate often, and just bring people along in the journey. It's the fear of the unknown. And number 2, do what you say you're going to do. Follow up and do what you say what you're going to do. And even if that thing is like, hey, we can't do that now, tell them why. And be as honest as you can about it, right? Because you're not going to be able to fix everything, but like I really truly believe in this like authentic leadership. And I don't want to be perceived as somebody who just gives people lip service, because I don't want lip service too, right? I think it does boil down to like, how would I want to be treated? So, that golden rule, I try to live it, and, and who knows, you can ask people that know me whether I show up or not. But, that's something that I think was hypercritical for us, is actually following through and listening to people, being like, you told us and we asked and we did something with it.
Yeah. So you can tell Adrian and I are just a little giddy hearing you talk. Because, so let me get this straight. You took a survey and you got the information, and then you did something with it? How revolutionary is that?
They're going to give me my trophy. I got to go to the trophy ceremony after this. No, but it's just as simple as that, right? And it's not just doing something as a point in time. It's this ongoing stuff. And so, I will frequently, hey, remember, we're still looking at this. This is what these regions are doing. And I was so dead set on being accountable to this, right? Like this became one of my OKRs. I report on this to our board. I talk to them. This is what's going on in the regions. This is how communication has changed. These are the small things and the small steps that we're taking. And now that we're almost, a full year past, I'm going to do the next survey in February to see, has anything changed? Like how our employees feel about us, and us actually showing up and doing the things help to build that trust.
One of the things you said that I really appreciated was, and if we don't have an update, I'm going to tell you. I liken this like, we all travel a ton, right? And when I'm in the airplane and we're on the tarmac and all of a sudden 30 minutes goes by and we haven't moved, I really appreciate it when the pilot comes down and says, hey, listen, no updates for you right now. I mean, I think we're getting close, but I just wanted to let you know.
Just tell me.
I appreciate that because, in that vacuum, right? It gets filled with rumor and innuendo and fear, and people start talking. And the fact that you tamp that down, it's all about building trust, right? And you showing up starts it. The follow through, the execution is what builds it. Is that sort of your formula to build trust? Is I'm not just going to show up. We're going to have a conversation, and then I'm going to tell you what we're doing with what you told me. Is that your best formula for trust?
I think so. Like from my perspective, telling people and listening to people and doing something with what they tell you is important. But I want to counter that with sometimes people want to come and just talk to me, but they want me to hold it in confidence. And so I also make sure that like before I do something with something that somebody said, that they're also comfortable with me sharing with it, or they're comfortable with the outcome that I am proposing of what we're going to do about whether that be just an employee relations issue or if they want to talk about their manager or something like that. But it's also, I guess in a way, yes, it's showing up and then doing something with it, but only doing something with it in the appropriate way, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And we're going to go in now into what we call segment 3, which is how you balance PE and sort of culture. So this is interesting. Chester and I, we've spoken to many PE firms, and sometimes the overall organization will bring us in to speak to lots of CEOs and senior CHROs, et cetera. And they want us to speak about culture because that's our expertise. but they also want to bring down costs and improve the bottom line. And there's probably going to be some sort of turn in 3 to 5 years. You have these two masters. You have to make sure your people feel good and you're taking care of culture, but you also have to make a profit here. How do you balance those two?
So for me, it comes back to this idea of our people are our product. And I will frequently also say that to our board, because sometimes I think that gets lost, right? And I try to boil this down to, if we don't have the right people supported in the field, we can't see patients and we can't bring better care to our communities. So when you think about things like creating enterprise value with people as your lens, what that means and how I can really translate that to them is really designing the organization so that it performs well when conditions change, like you said. But that only happens when HR really understands the lived reality of the clinicians and the teams that are actually doing the work. And so sometimes it's being able to not just show up and be like, well, this is retention and this is engagement. It's not giving them the HR metrics, right? It's putting it into a way that your your PE balanced board is really truly going to understand. But when you're in a PE backed MSO organization, for example, like that just looks different. The way that you have that conversation and achieve those outcomes is different.
Yeah, because they are skeptical professionals, right? Your MSO doctors and stuff, and they're quirky and they're, and so have you found that's what's really working, is not just asking, but justifying and putting it in context so that they get it? Because you're right. A lot of private equity, they look at HR as an expense.
100%. That's why my team's so small. Just kidding.
Yeah.
Okay, but again, I think it's back to that idea of like the people metrics translating them directly to EBITDA, because they're going to see, and I've seen before in previous organizations, they call it labor and wages. And when you really boil it down and you understand from their point of view, it's both your biggest cost, but also your revenue enabler. And you're using it from that perspective of how, let's say, turnover is impacting recruiting spend or overtime or lost patient capacity, and how like your underperforming managers are going to show up as like a productivity leakage, that you can start to really kind of tie them together of like how it erodes the margin and how it keeps us from scaling. And you're putting it into terms that are relevant to them while also making them understand that like people metrics, they're framed from the perspective of like EBITDA protection and growth and not like your HR health. That's when I think you're getting this like real alignment with PE, and they're like, oh, okay, I understand what you're saying then. It's not, you're trying to do this to save those margins or to save that growth or to make sure that we're able to deliver on the encounters or collect the revenue, right? But it's that framing piece that I would say is sometimes the hardest piece to get around.
Yeah. It's interesting. We're going to jump to another segment here. Time's flying by, but in the notes that Adrian sent me, it was so funny. He goes, the reason she's so great is she speaks 2 languages. She speaks the language of like culture and people, but she speaks the private equity language too. And that is such a rare combination, isn't it, Adrian? That you can translate why that people thing is so important to the bottom line and get the private equity guys say, yeah, you know what? We're going to add another part-time person to your HR team.
Yeah. I'd love that. That would be great.
Let's dive into culture. I think we're all culture geeks here, and that's what this is the Culture Works podcast. I looked through the questions we'd kind of sent you before, but I think the one we haven't tackled. So this would be to help somebody who's running an HR team or an HR professional somewhere, and maybe they're either their entire C-suite or a lot of the C-suite is new, maybe a new CEO, and they're trying to form together as a team while implementing big changes, because every new CEO wants to lead transformation. So how do we do that? Let's kind of talk through this. If you're coaching an HR person out there, how do they lead transformation while figuring out how to work together, and they're one of the members of this team? So let's think.
So I think if you think about how teams are formed, regardless of whether it's your leadership team or if it's a small team of hourly professionals, right? It's still that like storming, forming, norming, performing, right? And I think how I've done it previously, or what I hold myself accountable to, is being really explicit and intentional. We were all brand new. So we were, like any other team, we're struggling to both drive the business and drive outcomes while also trying to align around how do we make decisions? How do we disagree? Like, and what are people's triggers, if you will, right? How do I get around that? But it's by having those really honest and frank conversations. And in a remote world like I'm in today, it is deliberately spending time together as people, because a lot of times you're just connecting digitally, right? And all you're seeing is this much of me, but a lot of body language really does come through in person to be like, that person shifted in their seat when this topic came up. And I think HR people are just functional in a way that, like, I will see something and be like, that person said something very loud that nobody else in the room saw, but I understood, like, the shuffle in the seat, the uncomfortable side, the face they made. But you've got to get those things kind of right out the gate. You have to have those kind of like ugly, uncomfortable conversations of like, excuse my language, but like, what pisses you off and how do you react to that? How do you accept feedback? Are you somebody that accepts feedback? So I know when we're going 95 miles an hour, where I can step, where I can't step, because the sooner that we learn how each of us kind of work together, the sooner we can build that momentum. And you don't need to have perfect chemistry on day 1 or even day 2 or even day 90, but you need to have clarity. You need to have trust, and you need to really understand that shared operating rhythm. And I think when you're all kind of learning that together, you've got a little bit more wiggle room to make mistakes and say sorry. And also, I think saying sorry is a very important thing that not a lot of leaders do.
Yeah. Hey, you're talking to 2 Canadians. We say sorry all the time. A couple of things you mentioned there is digitally is okay. Yeah. But what are they like? People don't know. Adrian Gostic is 6'9". You'd never guess that from me.
You'd never guess that. Yeah.
I actually always hear people are like, I thought you'd be taller. And
yeah, exactly. Like, exactly, right?
And I'm 5'3". I'm tiny. And so I'm like, oh,
yeah.
Well,
let me ask you this, though. You've got a small team. You've got a lot going on. You got all this kind of stuff going on. How do you manage your team when everything is urgent? Like everything is, how do you back people up, calm them down and say, okay, here's what we're going to do?
So this is a very real example, because when I walked in, everything was urgent, but everything was urgent because there was no collective environment. And one of the first things I did was get my team on the same page, right? So we actually built a team charter, and I brought everyone together and was like, before we're even going to tackle any of these things, we need to understand how we're going to work together. It was very similar to the same type of thing that you're doing with your executive team, but we actually created a team charter. How do we deal with disagreements? How do we make decisions? What are our team goals? And once we were able to really kind of solidify the like, hey, it's okay to show up and be who you are, but this is how, when we get to a crossroad, who's kind of the decision maker ultimately, or if we have a disconnect, we're going to get on the phone and we're going to have a conversation about it, and everybody's comfortable kind of with that. And then you can really prioritize and figure out, like, what's loud for the sake of being loud and what's truly broken for the sake of being broken. And then being able to try to prioritize those things based on, what do we need to fix right now? Like, if this thing remains broken, it hinders these other things. And in a PE world, it's like, what's hindering revenue? And then from there, what's next? How do we prioritize? And again, it's not intentionally not focusing on things because it's not a lack of ambition. It's just, as a small team, trying to get collective around what's important being the same for all of us from a foundational issue, kind of similar of how you're building trust in the organization.
Excellent. Well,
so if you have one team member who's like so doggedly determined to root for a hockey team that just lost 9-0, would that be a problem on the team, do you think, Cory? Should we try and talk some sense into him?
That feels a little personal. That feels like that might be a little... I don't know hockey, but you said you're Canadian, so...
I was going to say, if you're Canadian, it always comes back to hockey. I mean, this inevitable. Hey, quick lightning round. This has been just delightful, Cory. So here we go. What's one piece of advice you'd give a CHRO walking into a PE-backed healthcare MSO with a lean team?
So interesting you asked that. Yesterday, I actually really loved a comment by somebody on LinkedIn that was describing that there are 2 types of CHROs in the PE environment and how search firms actually get this wrong. And so when you ask me this question, I would say it's important for that CHRO walking in with the lean team in a transformation to understand, am I a growth CHRO or am I a turnaround CHRO? And that distinction, I think, is going to be hypercritical, because some environments, you're going to need to be that growth person. You're going to need to build it from scratch. You're going to have to build the talent engine, the org design, the scalable systems, and others are going to need you to stabilize first. You're going to be that turnaround, right? You're going to be doing the decision making, building that trust and the operational reset. And so, like, before you sprint it's kind of that collect, gather, go. I think it's hyper important to understand like what type of CHRO do they want? And then what type of CHRO do they need? And are both of those things, what's kind of colliding when you get there on day one?
Excellent. Okay. So you've worked at companies preparing for IPOs. Yep. Big deal, right? Yep. What's the one people-related thing that gets overlooked in an IPO prep?
I would say companies focus super heavily systems, compliance, financials. But I think there's a gross underestimation of like how quickly leadership capability gets scrutinized once you're public, right? You don't really, I think, focus on that idea of like succession and contingency planning of can this person kind of rise to the occasion of the public scrutiny that you're going to get when your business perhaps goes south or when your business is doing good. And the other thing I would say is there's a gross underestimation of who's really needs to be under the tent and who doesn't. And I think that this is true both in IPO and M&A is there's a lot of idea of like, well, the CFO knows and the controller knows and this person knows. And it's like, but they're not the people putting the spreadsheets together. And they're not really the people that are doing the tangible day-to-day work or truly understand the process optimization that's going on at the scenes. And so I think small right teams beat small senior teams 10 times out of 10. And that was something that I think like just having the right people in the room really matters when it comes to getting things to the point where you're ready to go.
Excellent. I thought for sure you were going to say a huge HR team.
Not being selfish here.
Finish this sentence. The future of the healthcare workforce is ...
Let's say sustainable and flexible. Burnout continues to be real, regardless of what type of healthcare you're doing. I think we are still seeing the holdovers from COVID, from a lot of stuff changing. Compensation matters. People, hourly workers and a generally large hourly population will walk away for $1 or $2. So compensation is going to continue to matter. And when, as I said, people are your product, the systems around them have to work. They have to be surrounded by great people. They have to have a nucleus in their office who is that person that they can go to. And I think when an organization in healthcare can really figure out the balance of both workforce and economic reality, because that is another thing, those will be the ones that are going to continue to scale without people burning out. But again, I also would be remiss if I wouldn't say there's always going to be an organization around the block paying people $2 an hour and you're going to lose those types of people. But if you can fix some of that other tangible stuff, you're going to make yourself a stickier, I should say, stickier place to be. Yes.
I love this. This has been so helpful, Cory. Our assistant texted beforehand. You're going to love Cory. She's wicked smart.
Wicked smart.
And you are. This has been awesome. I
appreciate that.
Where can people find you? Where would you point them to?
They can find me on LinkedIn. I believe my LinkedIn handle, I think it's Cory L. Rose, one of those. Just look for me. You'll find me.
Hey, listen, thanks again. And thanks for all that knowledge you brought out. This is going to be a podcast that people in PE and all that, because we're going to listen to again and again and again. And by the way, we're always thanking all of you that tuned into the podcast. We appreciate you. We appreciate your support. Find Cory on LinkedIn, find Adrian on LinkedIn, find me on LinkedIn, and let's keep the journey going together, because when the culture works, everything else works. That's why we call it the Culture Work Podcast. Thanks, everybody. Cheers.